Good evening, I'm Farhana Sheikh. Iran's military leaders killed and nuclear facilities hit by Israeli strikes. And Trump urges Iran to reach a nuclear deal before it's too late. All of this and more coming up on AWANI International. Israel has carried out waves of strikes on Iran overnight, targeting its military leaders and nuclear facilities. Iran in response has launched about 100 drones towards Israeli territory on Friday morning, vowing retaliation. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the military operation would take as long as necessary, aimed at rolling back what he called the Iranian threat to Israelis' very survival. The strikes have killed several top leaders, including Iran's Revolutionary Guards Commander Hossein Salami, with the unit's headquarters in Tehran also hit. Another target was the Natanz nuclear facility, a key site for uranium enrichment. The International Atomic Energy Agency IAEA said there were no reports of nuclear contamination from the attack, which killed at least 6 scientists. A state of emergency has already been declared in Israel, with authorities preparing for further Iranian retaliation. Meanwhile, Iran has requested an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, calling the Israeli strikes a declaration of war. The UN and many countries, including China, have called for restraint, raising concerns about the prospects of peace in the region. Donald Trump urges Tehran to reach a nuclear deal to prevent further conflict with Israel before there is nothing left. The US president is also set to attend a National Security Council meeting later today.
The Trump administration has sought to distance the U.S. from the strikes. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the U.S. was not involved in the strikes, adding that Washington's top priority remains the safety of American forces in the region. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations said Israel has an ongoing dialogue with the U.S., but the decision to strike Iran was made independently. The strikes come just days before a planned 6th round of nuclear talks between U.S. and Iranian officials in Oman on Sunday. It is now unclear whether those talks will move forward. Trump had earlier warned that any military escalation could spark a massive conflict in the Middle East and undermine U.S.-Iran negotiations.
We have more for you after this break. Don't go anywhere.
Kelimomo datang lagi? Mungkin shampoo anda tidak 100%. Mari kita lihat. Gunalah Head & Shoulders. Menghilangkan kelimomo sehingga 100%. Membasmi kegagalan. Melindungi kulit kepala sehingga 48 jam. Supaya kelimomo dan kegagalan tidak datang lagi. Head & Shoulders.
Alami penstriman serba baharu bersama Max. Kini dengan Astro Box baharu.
Awesome!
Guardian Leviosa. Bukan sekadar filem. Itulah kami. Serta rakan-rakan.
Hello, lovers.
Melangkaui kebiasaan.
Michael versus a white shark.
I'll accept the challenge.
Nikmati kehidupan sepenuhnya.
It's smelling incredible.
That's delicious.
Segalanya di sini.
Let's get this party started!
Tawaran masa terhad. Pelanggan Astro. Add-on Max dan jimat 50% untuk 12 bulan di My Astro. Wow. Max, stream terbaik dengan Astro.
Welcome back. U.S. President Donald Trump's administration is attempting to block foreign students from enrolling at Harvard University. Although a federal judge has temporarily blocked the move and diplomatic posts have been ordered to resume processing of visas, the fight is far from over. Oizer Hao, chief executive of non-profit think tank Heya Inc., shares his insights on how the legal battle might unfold.
If
and let's say if the result is actually favoring the Trump administration's decisions, then it stops a huge uncertainties to all the students, new students enrolled, as well as all those senior students in the campus itself. So even when it comes to the end, if the Supreme Court actually give favorable decisions to the students, it's not siding with the Trump administrations. But because all these students' visas is all under the administrative purviews, so meaning the Trump administrations, although they are not allowed to ban it, but they can still have a lot of administrative actions to kind of slow it down or dragging it. So it actually stopped a huge uncertainties. And Harvard is actually at the losing side if you look at the current strategic positions.
There is a growing perception that the U.S. is no longer the global leader in higher education. Zihao weighs in on America's declining standing amid funding cuts and a lack of economic freedom.
I think the Trump administration has really halted the U.S. status as the world higher education's place for students, because if you look into this visa issue, this is just one of them. So there is even more terrible issue, which is haunting the higher education systems, typically those elite universities, those Ivy League universities in US currently. So you can easily point out some of them. A lot of those research funding is cut. So the funding, I mean, Harvard is again a very famous examples where Trump actually cut off all federal grant to all to Harvard. So basically, Harvard is not receiving any research grant, but not just Harvard. Other universities is also in the pipeline in review by the U.S. government, and the U.S. government have put in a lot of conditions to be fulfilled. That is one of the way that they can kind of cut off the fundings, if the universities doesn't meet all those stringent requirements. The second case, of course, is when we talk about the scope change. Now, previously, U.S. is in terms of on research and also in the universities academia, U.S. is a very liberal place. Liberal in terms of total academic freedoms. So universities can set their own scope on what is the research, what is the teaching and learning methods that they want to adopt in terms when it comes to universities' academics affairs. But now you can see the new U.S. administration under Trump has strictly restricts a lot of those research scopes. So typically, if you did encounter, so we did encounter that a lot of collaborations with the U.S. government now. If you are looking into renewable energies, if you look into climate change, if you look into decarbonizations, those are kind of deemed not aligned with the current U.S. administration's strategic initiatives.
With growing uncertainty, students and researchers are looking elsewhere. Zihao outlines the next big contender.
So the next place probably they will look to is UK or Australia, and UK being the most probable locations, because UK the entire UK university systems are almost up to par with the US one. So the one of the biggest difference within US and UK is probably the scale of the funding. Not to mention you have those Russell Group universities such as Oxbridge, LSE, Imperial College London that can actually provide almost equivalent capability in terms of research and developments and teaching and learnings for the students and the researchers.
In other news, New Zealand's Prime Minister Christopher Luxon is set to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang on an official visit to China next week. This marks his first visit to the country since being elected in late 2023.
Luxon's visit to Shanghai and Beijing will focus on trade, which was worth over $23 billion last year, as well as boosting ties in education, tourism and business opportunities. Discussions will also cover the two countries' bilateral relationship, along with key regional and global issues. The trip comes a week after some of Luxon's predecessors warned against positioning New Zealand as an adversary of its biggest trading partner. In an open letter, the former leaders urged Luxon to reaffirm New Zealand's bipartisan commitment to its strategic partnership with China. Following his trip to Beijing, Luxon is scheduled to head to Europe for bilateral visits to Brussels and The Hague, where he would meet with European Union leaders to discuss trade, security, and the shifting geopolitical landscape.
A U.S. federal judge has blocked Donald Trump's administration from deploying California's National Guard to Los Angeles. However, the order will not take immediate effect, pending an appeal from the government.
The state had sued Trump on Monday over his order to deploy the troops without California Governor Gavin Newsom's consent. U.S. District Judge Charles Breyer ruled that Trump's actions were illegal, ordering him to return control of the troops to Newsom. But the Trump administration argues that federal control was necessary to restore order and protect Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, agents amid protests over its immigration raids. A total of 4,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines had been ordered to quell the unrest, with some now authorized to detain people until police can make arrests. The last time a president deployed the National Guard without a governor's consent was over 50 years ago, during the civil rights era.
China has warned the G7 nations against manipulating issues related to it to serve their own agenda. Beijing's criticism comes ahead of the G7 summit that is set to begin on Sunday.
Amid rising US-China trade tensions, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian slammed the bloc's Cold War mentality and urged it to stop interfering in other countries' internal affairs and politicizing China-related issues. In last year's summit in Italy, the group mentioned China over 20 times, calling for protection against Beijing's alleged unfair trade practices. It also threatened action against Chinese financial institutions accused of helping Russia acquire weapons for the war in Ukraine. The G7 summit will run for 3 days in Canada and will feature new leaders from 5 of the 7 members: Britain, Canada, Germany, Japan, and the United States.
The UN General Assembly has passed a resolution demanding an immediate, unconditional and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, just days after the US vetoed a similar measure in the Security Council. 149 countries voted in favor, 19 abstained and 11, including the US and Israel, voted against.
The resolution condemns the use of starvation as a weapon and calls on Israel to end the blockade, open all crossings, and allow full humanitarian access. It also reaffirms support for a two-state solution and rejects the forced displacement of Palestinians. General Assembly resolutions are not binding, but China's permanent representative to the UN, Fu Chong, says the resolution sends a strong political signal and reflects international consensus. Fu urged Israel to fulfill its obligations as an occupying power by lifting the Gaza blockade and reiterated China's support to UN and humanitarian efforts. The Israel-Hamas war will enter its second year in October, with the Palestinian death toll now surpassing the 55,000 mark. Previous demands for a ceasefire by countries and world bodies have been ignored.
The US House of Representatives has approved a $9.4 billion spending cut on foreign aid and public broadcasting. The measure was passed narrowly by a vote of 214 to 212.
In the House, where President Donald Trump's Republicans hold a slim majority, only 4 Republicans joined the 208 Democrats in voting against the bill. The bill would now be sent for consideration by the Senate, which must act by July 18th. If it is signed into law, the proposal would make permanent some of the spending cuts Trump enacted through executive orders or via the Department of Government Efficiency. Trump has referred to foreign aid as wasteful, calling the National Public Radio and the Public Broadcasting Service a radical left disaster. But Democrats say the rescissions are hurting America's standing and would lead to unnecessary deaths.
That wraps up AWANI International. Stay tuned for reports on the rivalries, strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more and be sure to follow our social media accounts at Power Affairs. I'm Farhana Sheikh. Thank you for watching and good night.